Hey everybody, Eric Grenier here from the Writ.ca, and welcome to this latest episode of the Writ Show. We're now a few days into this election campaign, and we have seen the polls move a little bit since that Writ drop on Sunday. So why don't we take a look at where those numbers stand right now. So we're going to be looking at the poll tracker that I'm running throughout this campaign. It's an aggregation of all the polls that are out there, all the public polls that are released. They are in this aggregate that I'm running for the CBC. Now, the Liberals are leading in that aggregate. They now have 40.8% support, so they are over that 40% mark. And we've started to see a number of polls now that are putting them more in the 42, 44, sometimes a little bit higher than that. So I suspect that the poll tracker average is going to keep going up with new updates over the next few days. What's really interesting about these numbers, though, is that the Conservatives haven't really moved at all. Right now, they're at 37.5%. They're actually up a little bit from where they were just a couple days ago. Their vote is holding, and it's at a pretty high vote for them. You know, if you look at the history of the Conservative Party, 37% is usually enough to win at least a minority government. They've actually never lost, at least not since the 1920s, an election with this much support. So the fact that they are able to actually get this number of the vote, this level of the vote, but not win a government is really unusual. And it's unusual because the NDP is usually a lot higher than this. Right now, we have the NDP at just 9% support. We've seen a number of polls even recently have them at 6 or 7. So again, while the Liberals are going to keep being dragged up by new polls as they're released, the NDP might continue to be dragged down. It's because the NDP is so low that the Liberal number is as high as it is, and that the Conservative number is not high enough to win an election. The Bloc Québécois is at 6%. They've also been dropping in Quebec. The Greens are at 3%, the People's Party at 2%, and other parties are at 1%. Now, in terms of what this would produce for an election, well, right now in the averages, in the poll tracker, it's 189 seats for the Liberals. That's well above the threshold for majority government. The Conservatives are at 126 seats, which is more or less where they were at dissolution if we take into account the added seats to the electoral map. The Bloc Québécois has dropped now there to 23 seats, so that is a loss compared to last election of 9 seats. The NDP is still just at 4 seats. They are just in so much trouble. The Greens are at 1, and no one else is projected to win. If we look at the likely ranges, which are designed to take in a little bit more possibility for error in the polls, error in the projection model, the Liberals are between 165 and 207 seats. Pretty much all of that scenario is a win. If the Liberals win 165 seats, it might be just below the threshold for a minority government, but that'll be enough for them to stay in power. The Conservatives are between 113 and 147. The Bloc Québécois between 19 and 27 seats, the NDP between 1 and 6, and the Greens between 0 and 2. So we're really looking at where the numbers are right now. That is a Liberal victory. No matter how you really look at it, it is hard to imagine that the Conservatives could win this election if it were held today, based on where the numbers are. The polls are just usually not going to be off by that much to put into doubt that the Liberals would win more seats with these kinds of numbers. Now, I have to always remind everybody listening, this is if the election were held today. It's not if the election were held in the future. And it is going to be held in the future. April 28th will be voting day. And so there could be some changes between now and then. So while it is right now the Liberals' election to lose, doesn't mean that's not going to happen. But nevertheless, because of where things are right now, the chances we have of a Liberal majority government, if the election were held today, if this was my final projection before Election Day, 71% chance that the Liberals would win a majority government, a 19% chance they would win a plurality of seats, and just an 8% chance that the Conservatives would win a plurality of seats, and a 1% chance they could actually win a majority. It just, again, is just a huge change from not too long ago when the Liberal chances of winning were about 1% or less. I actually have a little thing that, you never want to say something is a 0% chance, but it was pretty much a 0% chance at that point. Now, we'll take a look again at where things stand across the country. Right now in Western Canada, we have the Liberals and the Conservatives effectively tied in British Columbia, 40% for the Liberals, 40%, a little bit lower than that, for the Conservatives, 12% for the NDP, and only 5% for the Greens. Greens usually do pretty well in BC. 5% is not a very strong performance. In Alberta, Conservatives right now at 55% support. Liberals are at 27.5%, so they're up quite a bit from the last election. And for the NDP, and just 2%, 2 to 3% for both the Greens and the People's Party. In Saskatchewan and Manitoba, the Conservatives are leading with 48% support, the Liberals at 33%, the New Democrats are at 13%, and you see in Ontario, there has been a pretty big shift over the last little while, a 45% support for the Liberals, 39% for the Conservatives. They're now behind by 5 points, and under 10% for the NDP. They're just in so much trouble. If we go to Quebec and Atlantic Canada, we have right now 39% support for the Liberals in Quebec. The Bloc is at 27. The Conservatives are at 22. The NDP is just at 6% in Quebec. And then in Atlantic Canada, we have 53% support for the Liberals, 32% for the Conservatives, 9% for the NDP. Now, to look at what this would produce for regional seat projections, let's take a look at that. Right now in BC, we do have that the Liberals would be favored to win more seats than the Conservatives right now. The NDP is really struggling. The Greens are struggling. A lot of those Liberal seats, I think, would be in the Lower Mainland, on Vancouver Island, places where David Eby's New Democrats did well in last fall's provincial election in British Columbia. In Alberta, we have 25 to 31 seats for the Conservatives, 5 to 11 for the Liberals. That 11, to me, a little bit high. I'm not sure that the Liberals can actually win that many seats, but with the kind of movement we've seen, a number of ridings in Edmonton and a couple in Calgary could be won by the Liberals with the kind of numbers we've seen in the polls. In Saskatchewan and Manitoba, we have the Conservatives winning the most seats, the Liberals winning 8 to 10, mostly in Winnipeg and in the northern ridings in both Manitoba and Saskatchewan. And in Ontario, we have the Liberals winning the most seats, 65 to 87. Pretty much the seats that they won last time. Not seeing that there would be a lot of change in the Liberal and Conservative seats. The Liberals would, right now, based on where the polls are, win the seats that they won last time. It's a question of where the NDP would be. And some of the seats that they had in Northern Ontario, London, Windsor, would those go to the Liberals or the Conservatives? The kind of numbers we're starting to see in Ontario, it looks more like they would go to the Liberals. And then in Quebec and Atlantic Canada, right now we have 38 to 46 seats for the Liberals in Quebec. The Bloc is at 19 to 27. The Conservatives could pick up some seats. They're between 11 and 14. And in Atlantic Canada, 25 to 27 seats for the Liberals. So they look likely to win all the seats that they won last time and maybe knock off a few Conservatives in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Newfoundland and Labrador. Now for the trend line, we can see how it is still remaining a very dramatic change over the last little while, but let's just reduce this to a little bit of a closer look at where things have been. This is since the beginning, the end of February. So you can see that the trend line is continuing in favor of the Liberals and largely at the expense of the NDP. You can see here that the Liberal number keeps going up. Now, if we look at some of the areas, British Columbia, I think, is the one that is really worth looking at because we see that the Liberals have moved ahead. That is just something that's happened in the latest update. And if we really drill down, you can see it's just happened recently. And again, this mirror image you have of the Liberal vote, the NDP vote in BC, this is largely NDP vote going to the Liberals, and you see it pretty much everywhere. You can see that same mirror image in Alberta, and you can see it in the Prairies. Actually, in the Prairies, it looks a little bit more like the Conservatives, but you definitely see it in Ontario, and you can see that in Atlantic Canada, it is coming from both the Conservatives and the NDP. So lots of change that we've seen over the last little while. And maybe the most dramatic graphic I can show you is the odds of winning. It's really shifted, and boy, has it shifted quite a bit. This is more or less when the polls shifted in the summer of 2023. The Conservatives moved ahead. Their odds of winning were at 99% for most of 2024. And it's been just a big swing over the last little while. That's what a change of leader, that's what threats from Donald Trump can do to public opinion in Canada. Now, the last episode, I said that I was going to take some questions. You left some questions in the comments in the last episode of The Writ Show, and I do want to get to a few of them. There's two that I chose, the ones that I could answer, and I think hopefully the answers would be interesting. So we had a question from Cheyenne Taffy. Said, I have a question about undecided voters. Why does no one talk about them or share poll numbers on where they stand? So that's a really good question, because we see that in the poll tracker, in the polls that you see reported in the media, it is always the decided and leaning voters. The undecided voters are usually not reported in those top line numbers. So how it usually works is that pollsters do ask if you're decided, if you have a party you're going to vote for, and if you say no, they then ask, are you leaning towards one party or another? Then after that, there is still the people who are remaining undecided. Those people are usually not reported too much. There's a number of reasons for that. But in terms of where things stand in the polls for undecided voters, I just pulled up some of the numbers. We've seen anywhere from 6 to 10% undecided vote in Canada right now. That's not very high. But the thing is that with the polling methodologies that are used these days, undecided numbers are not very high. I don't think it's very reflective of the actual number of undecided voters. There's a number of reasons for that. One is that increasingly the people who take part in polls are the ones who are politically engaged, the ones who actually will go out to vote. If you're an undecided voter, probably not too engaged in the election to begin with. And if you get a call for a poll or you get an invitation to take part in a poll for a panel, you're probably not going to do it just because you're not going to vote. You're not that interested. So I don't think it's very reflective of the undecided voter tally. Why also they're usually not spent too much time discussed is that, generally speaking, in past elections, if you just remove the undecideds from the sample, the poll still ends up being pretty accurate. It's because those undecided voters, generally they do one of two things. One, they don't vote, or two, they break in similar proportions to the decided vote. So excluding them from the sample doesn't actually change things that much. So that's one of the reasons why they're not really focused on too much. I do think that the methodological differences over time is one of the reasons. You often see higher undecided rates in a telephone poll versus an online versus an IVR. So it becomes hard to compare apples to apples, and it becomes a little bit of an apples to oranges exercise. So that's one of the reasons why we don't focus too much on undecided voters, but that's a good question. Got another question as well. This one came from Cameron648. He said, how do these numbers compare to what the polls were saying at this point in the campaign during comparable past elections? He said 1984. So those two elections are seen as potential precedents, or at least comparables to this one. Why? In 1984, Pierre Trudeau was the Liberal Prime Minister. He had become quite unpopular in the polls. He had been in power since 1968. He had been there for a long time. There was a brief PC win for the Joe Clark PCs in 1979, but he had been there for a long time, government unpopular. New leader comes in, John Turner, and the Liberals shoot up in the polls. Sounds kind of familiar to what we got right now with Justin Trudeau, unpopular, leaves, new leader comes in, shoots up in the polls. 1993, similar situation. Brian Mulroney was the Prime Minister. He had been in power since 1984. That's a little bit of a hint of what comes next. But he was in power since 1984, very unpopular. He resigns. He's replaced by Kim Campbell. She shoots up in the polls. Again, you see the precedence and the comparable situation between then and now. Now, what happened in 1984? John Turner's campaign went very poorly, and he lost to Brian Mulroney. In 1993, Kim Campbell's campaign went very poorly, and she lost to Jean Chrétien. So the question is, what were the numbers at this stage of the campaign? So in 1993, there was a few polls. Well, that's one of the biggest differences. Not a lot of polls back then. But in 1993, at the end of the first week of the campaign, the PCs and the Liberals were roughly tied. There was one poll had a 3-point lead for the PCs, one poll had a tie. So at this stage of the campaign in 1993, it was neck and neck with a small PC lead. By the end of the campaign, the PCs dropped to 16% support and won 2 seats. So things can change. Now, in 1984, I brought out one of my books that I love. This is one of the books on the 1984 election, and it had a list of the polls in the 1984 election. In the first days of that campaign, there was a poll that came out, and the Liberals had a 2-point lead. The next poll was 2 weeks later. That just shows you how things are different back then. There weren't daily polls, so there wasn't really any indication what was shifting in those 2 weeks. But things did shift because the poll that was done 2 weeks later had the PCs 9 points ahead. So it shows that things can change quite quickly. Whether or not this is the actual examples to use to guide us for this campaign, that one I'm not so sure of. I think that the context is quite different. The 84 elections, the 93 elections were kind of normal elections in terms of the issue set, what people were caring about. This election is very much about one single issue, Donald Trump and the tariffs. So it has a different dynamic that I think is going to play out differently. But we'll see what's going to happen. We're going to keep on updating the polls over the next little while, and I'll keep doing that on the Writ Show a couple times a week, maybe once on the weekend. We'll see how things go. If you want your question answered, leave it in the comments below. I'll try to get to, again, maybe 1 or 2, depending on how much time we have. And hopefully I can answer some of your questions over the next few weeks. If you didn't catch it earlier this week, I had a really great episode of the Writ podcast. I really think if you haven't listened to it, you definitely should. We had 3 really great former campaigners. They went into the nitty-gritty about how it works to organize a campaign, what happens on the campaign tour, how they decide where they're going. It was a really good look at behind the scenes of how elections go. So you can find that here on the channel. Philip and I had our episode of the numbers yesterday, so you can take a look at that, and we'll have our next episode on Monday. And we are going to have a special episode that's for our Patreon members that will be out tomorrow on Saturday. So if you want to listen to that, you can go to thenumberspod.ca, join the Patreon, and get that bonus episode. So the campaign is going to keep on rolling on, and so will the Writ Show. So until next time, thanks for watching.